week in Cologne, Germany, Europe's largest public video game convention, Gamescom, took place, featuring playable demos for many of the biggest upcoming games releasing in 2024 and 2025. The event also featured a large number of independent hardware manufacturers, indie game demos, and accessibility-focused announcements. Having travelled to Gamescom last week for freelance work, I actually came back to my office this week with an unexpected surprise. I now own a Byowave Proteus Accessibility controller. Sort of. So, here's the situation. A few months back, the Byowave Proteus controller, an accessibility controller for Xbox and PC made of a series of modular cubes, was made available for pre-order, shipping toward the end of 2024 to customers. I've been really eager to get my hands on one to test out ever since, and went to Biowave's show floor booth at Gamescom, intending to try one out and come back with some light initial impressions. As it turns out, BioWare had made the decision to soft launch the device at Gamescom by selling some of their development test kits at the event for full retail price. I have a retail unit coming a couple of months from now anyway, but I made the decision to pick up a development kit at the show so that I could get a head start on coverage and forming opinions on the controller kit for work. I paid for both my pre-ordered retail unit and development kit from Gamescom personally, and was not provided any hardware or discount for review. I was warned at the time that the development kit was not final, and would differ in a couple of ways. Some of the components, I was told, would be 3D printed rather than finalised parts, and might have slightly stiff locking connections as a result, which I was fine with. That said, since purchasing the dev kit at Gamescom, I have become aware of a number of other technical bugs and issues with the dev kit, which I was not informed of at point of purchase. These include a bug where the controller won't switch on if one of the power cubes is connected to an analog stick cube, requiring controller disassembly, powering on the power cube, then reassembly. While I will not hold these bugs against my overall opinion of the retail version, which will apparently fix these issues, I'm honestly a little bit annoyed that I wasn't informed about these more notable issues before purchasing the dev kit, purely from the perspective that I was sold it at full retail price, despite it having clear functionality drawbacks which were not disclosed prior to purchase. If you're going to sell a version of your controller that you know has some issues, those should probably be disclosed, and ideally the price adjusted slightly to account for the difference in user experience compared to the full-price retail controller that is about to start shipping out to people. The Proteus controller is already one of the more expensive accessibility controllers on the market at a $300 starting price, and if you're selling dev units to the public, these kinds of bugs do impact the initial impression that people will get of the device if they're not disclosed. That said, I want to separate those dev kit issues from the rest of this hands-on impressions piece, hence getting them out of the way early. From here on, I'd like to focus on the elements of the Proteus controller that, to my understanding, are representative of the experience that people will have when they receive their pre-ordered retail units over the coming weeks and months. Additionally, for those watching the video version of this episode of Accessibility, I apologise for some of the freehand video footage in this episode. I had to record my unboxing solo at Gamescom with a camera but no tripod, hence some freehand footage and close recording angles. The Byowave Proteus controller ships out of the box with 2 power and communication cubes, 2 analog stick cubes, 2 45-degree angle adapters, 1 triangular adapter, a D-pad, a face button interface, 2 bumper and trigger interfaces, 1 additional analog stick module, 2 additional programmable buttons, 2 wing handles, 1 charging port connector, 1 USB dongle, and a series of magnetic caps designed to protect open connection surfaces not in use in a given controller setup. These cubes and circular modular components can be connected together in basically any configuration, as long as it contains at least 1 power cube, with new components fairly easy to assemble. When connecting 2 cubes together, users push the cubes into place as they would like them oriented, and move a plastic clip into a locking position. When connecting modular components onto cube faces, users will need to insert the component at a slight angle offset, then rotate it to lock it into place. Generally speaking, there are no other steps involved in setup, as the controller handles recognizing which component has been connected and in which orientation. The exception to this is if you're using the optional unprogrammed large additional button modules, or if you wish to remap things like analog stick north directions, you will require the use of an app to set those up. I was honestly pretty impressed with how simple setup was. There is a little bit of manual dexterity required in assembly, Some of the inputs, at least in the dev kit, are a little stiff to move into the locked position, and rotating components to lock them into place can be a little bit fiddly on occasion, but generally speaking everything was very intuitive to connect, and not needing a software-side program to register the controller mapping was really appreciated. If you find yourself needing to adjust the configuration of the Proteus controller during play, you can do that, and I do really appreciate Biowave's approach to that process. If you disconnect or connect a component or cube while the controller is switched on and connected, the controller lights will start to cycle in rainbow colours briefly, during which time any inputs pressed on the controller will not register. This allowed me to, with confidence, not stress about accidentally pressing inputs while adding a new component onto the controller and causing myself issues in-game, and gave me a clear signal of when new components were successfully connected and I'd had gameplay control returned to me. This solves a big issue that I have with the PlayStation Access controller by comparison, where switching inputs often comes with the stress of trying not to accidentally activate those inputs while swapping out keycaps. As a bit of an aside, I spent a lot of my time last week at Gamescom when either overwhelmed or overstimulated by the chaos of the event, sitting and messing around disassembling and reassembling the controller components, which I kept in a small bag in my handbag. They're really satisfying to handle and work great as a stimming object. A fun side effect perhaps of the way that they're composed of a sensory satisfying plastic, magnets, switches, analog sticks, and buttons with varying degrees or types of clicking responses. In terms of use cases for the Proteus controller, from around 5 days of testing, here's what has worked for me so far and what hasn't translated well from concept into practicality. If you're looking to create a one-handed controller setup for use on Xbox or PC, the Proteus is a pretty great kit for that use case. It can be configured in a number of different one-handed configurations, ranging from a Wiimote or Joy-Con style remote form factor, with all of the necessary buttons arranged wherever most convenient, or something more akin to the 8-bit Do Lite SE, as a square or rectangular controller with most of its inputs arranged on the top face of the controller, able to be placed flat on a table or desk and manipulated almost like a custom gaming keyboard of sorts. I found the remote-style single-handed control method particularly useful out of these two layouts. It works well as a condensed-style standard controller if you need your inputs closer together, but in a still somewhat traditional form factor layout. It works well if, like me, you have trouble with resting your fingers on the triggers and bumpers of a standard game controller. For me, being able to move these inputs from the top of a controller onto the back face of the device made them much easier for me to reach in my natural, slightly claw-like controller gripping position. They're also really convenient if, like me, you find your hands become painful or fatigued and less dexterous after playing for extended periods of time with your hands in a single position with a traditional controller. One of my favourite setups currently for the Proteus is very much like a standard Xbox controller, but with a 45-degree upward angle between the lower and upper inputs. This allows my hands to sit in a slightly different position, with slightly less stretch involved in reaching lower inputs, which I really appreciate as an option. Now, at this point, I want to talk about something that isn't currently possible with the Proteus controller, but will be in the near future, with a caveat attached. Splitting your controls between two separated hands. Out of the box, the Proteus controller contains two cubes capable of powering the controller on and transmitting data. With that in mind, the first setup configuration that I tried to set up for the Proteus controller when I got my dev kit was a Nintendo Switch style setup, with half of my controls in one remote-shaped controller and the other half in the other hand, using co-pilot mode to turn the pair back into a single controller on the software end. This was my dream Proteus controller setup, as one of the many things I struggle with when using a traditional controller is pain and discomfort from holding my hands together, near each other, fixed in position in front of me. Being able to have my hands untethered from each other hugely improves my ability to play games comfortably, and the idea of a split-handed Xbox controller setup is something I've been hoping would become a reality for years. I've even made videos on this topic before about both Xbox and PlayStation. Now, there's good news and bad news about my dreams of this kind of setup using the Proteus controller. Let's start with the bad news. Out of the box, this is not possible with the Proteus controller, at least if you're purchasing a single kit. The issue is that, while there are two power and transmission cubes included in the package, there's only one USB dongle, and each dongle will only sync to one controller cube at a time. You also cannot just directly Bluetooth connect to the cube, as seemingly the dongle handles part of translating the cube's signals into controller inputs. Now, a split-handed control scheme with the Proteus controller is possible. I got to test the setup briefly at Gamescom, and it was everything I hoped it would be. The issue is, you need a second dongle to make that work. Now, when I first purchased the dev kit at Gamescom and spoke to the controller's creators, they stated that there were plans to potentially offer an additional dongle for sale later down the line, but that they did not know when that would be. I'm guessing I wasn't the only person to bring this use case up at Gamescom, as by the time I got home from the event, Byowave were already offering pre-orders for additional dongles on their website. The only catch, they're $30 each, an additional 10% cost on top of an already very pricey accessibility controller. Now, I don't know Biowave's financials. Maybe an additional USB dongle really does cost $30 for them to produce, but that price feels really steep. It does feel a little like they're being sold at a bit of a markup, which, if accurate, is disappointing given the already high price of the base device kit. Additionally, I would be remiss if I didn't discuss an alternative solution for split-handed Xbox controls, which was also revealed at Gamescom: the new Xbox Adaptive Joystick. Shaped like a Wii nunchuck, this wired controller contains an analog stick, trigger, bumper, and 4 face buttons. A pair of these would support all of the functions of an Xbox controller, minus the Start, Select, and Xbox Home buttons, and would cost, I believe, £60, £30 each? Sure, they're wired, meaning either cables trailing from your console to you, or you needing an Xbox Adaptive controller to plug in order to reduce wire trailing. But when these release in early 2025, they are likely to be a much cheaper way of accessing split-handed controls on Xbox, if you don't mind needing to be connected by wires. At the end of the day, price is the big barrier when it comes to recommending the Byowave Proteus controller at present. I cannot deny that it's an engineering marvel, and being able to switch between configurations has a lot of benefits, but this does come at a premium, and it isn't going to be the go-to accessibility controller that I suggest to every disabled gamer who asks me about options. There are some use cases I think it's a great fit for. If you're a developer looking for an accessibility controller you can make available at conventions for your demo booth, the customizability of this controller is going to allow a lot of flexibility for different kinds of people to be able to play your demo without needing to bring a lot of additional wired inputs with you. If you've got limited suitcase space when travelling to a convention, it's a small, compact, and highly customizable option, easy to find space to bring along with you. If you're someone whose needs fluctuate, being able to reconfigure this during play is fantastic. If you're someone like me who struggles with cognitive load when handling an accessibility controller setup with a lot of wires involved, this avoids a lot of that. If your accessibility issues would be best solved by a more compact or single-handed controller setup, this is a great option. There are a lot of use cases in which this might be the best accessibility controller out there for someone. But if you're looking for a flat controller with all inputs on the top face, maybe the 8-bit Do Lite SE for Xbox will be a better fit. If you're looking for just split-handed controls on Xbox and don't mind wires, you might have a cheaper option on the horizon early next year. I think this controller is going to be amazing as an optional part of wider accessibility setups, at least on paper. If you're someone who uses the Xbox Adaptive controller to play with your feet, this could be a one-handed option for your remaining inputs, for example. There's a bunch of setups I can imagine this being useful in, and I already have a number of configurations that are going to be useful for me going forward. But at the end of the day, a $300 entry price, plus an additional $30 if you need a second dongle, makes this the most expensive of the mass-produced console accessibility controllers out there today, and that is a hurdle that makes this hard to casually recommend. I think you need to either have a firm idea in mind of a use case that it will serve that none of the other accessibility controllers on the market currently fit for you, or have an opportunity to try one out at a convention like Gamescom before committing to the price tag it has attached. For all my thoughts on price when it comes to the Xbox Adaptive controller, PlayStation Access controller, and even the Hori Flex for Switch, none of them is quite this expensive to get your foot in the door with and try out as part of your gaming setup. The Xbox Adaptive controller is £70, plus maybe an additional £30 if you want the Logitech Adaptive Gaming Kit with it. The PlayStation Access controller is comparable, with the ability to get an entry setup below £100. £300 is the kind of price that really demands you know upfront if this is going to work for you. You need to be confident it's going to be a worthwhile investment upfront. Despite my feelings on price, I don't want to end my impressions on a negative note. The price is steep, and it's worth acknowledging that. But if you can overcome that hurdle, I think the Proteus is a really exciting accessibility controller, and one I honestly have a lot of love for already after just a few days' use. The controller does feel really premium. The setup options do allow for a really good variety of ways the device can be tweaked, and I shouldn't downplay the fact that once the second dongle ships, I do genuinely believe this is going to become my default controller for Xbox and PC. I know I acknowledged that the upcoming Xbox Adaptive Joystick will be a cheaper way to achieve my desired split-handed control setup, but now that I own the Proteus and have an additional dongle ordered, I can say that the convenience of wired connection will make this a lot more appealing for me to use in my use case. Even beyond price and wireless connection, on the Proteus I'll be able to have my triggers and bumpers moved, and my controller at a slightly more comfortable angle in my hands, and that is ultimately going to be more accessible for me. I know I've spent a lot of this impressions piece talking about pros and cons a little bit in isolation, but I want to end on some thoughts that are a little more personal and a little less analytical-brained. I'm lucky that my job makes picking up something like the Proteus controller a little easier to justify than it might otherwise be. I have a work incentive to pick this up for coverage, and that somewhat offsets some of the price maths that go into justifying grabbing one. It's expensive, but that's less likely to be a barrier for me than it is for most. In all honesty, I kind of love this controller. Yes, I'm using a dev kit right now that's a little bit buggy, and my dream setup is a little out of reach still, but despite that I already feel the magic of what this controller represents. Being able to swap my controller's shape between two different angles with relative ease, a way to mitigate hand pain and fatigue, on a controller where my triggers can be in a non-standard position, is already making a really big impact on how I play. Trigger and bumper position is just one of those standardized aspects of controller design I'd become so used to, I hadn't thought to question. I wasn't ready for how big a difference that would make until I had a controller that made it possible. That's the magic of something like the Proteus. It's the little tweaks that, until possible, you might not even consider. It's the ability to open your eyes to the fact that there's a barrier that controllers could remove to make play easier, suddenly made possible when every input position is modular, and that's pretty special indeed. I need to spend more time with the Proteus controller before I publish a more formal review. I want to wait for my retail unit to arrive to see if the bugs that I mentioned have been fixed, I want to get some proper hours in with a split-handed setup in my own home, and I want to see how it fits into my life when not in device testing reviewer mode. The price is steep, but I do think the Proteus controller is something special when working correctly. It's not going to be the accessibility controller that I recommend to everyone, but for specific use cases this thing is truly magical, and I am incredibly glad it exists. Thank you so much to this month's Patreon backers who help make this show possible. You can support the show and everything I do at patreon.com/LauraKBuzz.